There is a partial verdict in the Diddy case. After 2 days, the jury has reached unanimous decisions on 4 of the 5 counts.
The problem is that 5th count means that we don't get to find out what the verdicts are on the other 4 because they are hung up on racketeering.
Which is what we talked about for days now, that racketeering from the get-go has been the problematic count
it is a
for
very
the prosecution.
complicated charge.
And a lot of people saying it's square peg, round hole, that we know that there are multiple jurors on both sides. It's not just one holdout, that on racketeering, they are stuck. But they have reached a decision on sex trafficking as it results with Cassie. They've reached a decision on the Mann Act, the interstate transportation of a sex worker, as to Cassie. They have reached a decision, unanimous, on sex trafficking as to Jane, and they have reached a decision on the Mann Act as to Jane.
So, but what does this mean? What's confusing is all of those things that you just said are also included in the racketeering count.
So we don't know what the vote is.
So we don't know what the vote is. It's hard to read what they possibly came up with.
Let me read between the lines on what you're saying, because with Charles, I think it's just a valid point that you need to find 2 crimes in order to apply the RICO statute, the racketeering statute. If they found Diddy guilty on the Mann Act, which is the most likely as to both Jane and Cassie, those are 2 illegal counts. And therefore,
so we think they'd have enough.
So what I'm saying to you is, and I said to you all along, which is Diddy really the racketeer that people are used to hearing?
And so you think that perhaps there's a juror or 2 or more
than one,
who are confused about the racketeering. Like, how can this be racketeering if it's just Diddy doing it?
And the reason I say that is we know early on there was one juror, remember, where the jury said he's not following the law.
Juror 25.
And I said to you, I think this is a racketeering charge, that it just...
that's the one they were hung up on.
So we don't know as to the other 4 whether Diddy has been found guilty or not guilty, but there's a hint that with Cassie, the jury asked to review a transcript where
she was talking about a flight from Cannes to New York.
Right.
And this is the flight where Diddy said to her,
she testified that
he showed her a video of a freak-off that she participated in and said, if you don't participate in another freak-off when we get to New York, I'm going to put this video out. I'm going to send it to your mother.
And that's coercion.
She testified to that.
If the jury
believed her, that's coercion. They would have Cassie. They would have sex trafficking of Cassie.
The complication is that Cassie never mentioned that in her direct testimony when she was on the stand. She never mentioned it on cross-examination. Only on redirect did the...
So you think that the jury might not believe her because they might be thinking, well, why wouldn't she have brought that up in the first place when she was testifying?
What I'm saying to you is maybe that's why they wanted to review the transcript. But... I mean, I don't think this is great news for Diddy that they came back this quickly unanimously.
Well, the reports from inside the court are that he was sitting there looking pretty upset when they came back and said that they had reached a verdict on 2, 3, 4, and 5.
I think it's pretty terrible news for Diddy if they were asking for this testimony, because it suggests that there's a dynamic of trying to convince someone who is holding out belief that these were maybe not consensual. You bring that testimony and put it in front of them and say, oh, really? Look at the Intercontinental Hotel. Look at the threat on the flight to Cannes. Look at this evidence of this sex worker who said he heard Cassie being slapped around by Diddy and then forced to participate in a freak-off. That's the kind of testimony you ask for when you're trying to convince someone. That's why I think it's probably leaning towards guilt. Now, on the racketeering, I agree with you that the predicate acts may be found, but that's not all they need. There's an ultimate question. The first question on the jury verdict form is, do you find him guilty or not guilty of racketeering? Before you even get to the predicate acts, which you only get to if you find guilt, they could just be hung up on that question and say, this guy's not Tony Soprano. I am not convinced that I even want to find guilt on the act.
Yeah. Now, here's the complication. The jury came in and said, look, we can't make a decision on racketeering. We seem deadlocked. And then the question is, Jason, help me out here. There's something called the Allen charge, which is kind of the nuclear weapon of a judge, where the judge kind of gently badgers them and says, you got to reach a decision in some form. And there was a lot of talk about whether the judge should give that charge or just send him back, or just throw his hands up and say, you're hung, and that's it, and we'll just read the 4 counts.
Yeah, so prosecutors wanted a modified Allen charge, some sort of an instruction from the judge when sending them back in to deliberate that it varied in some way from the original charge he gave them to deliberate until they have a verdict. The defense immediately said, no, we shouldn't modify the Allen charge, at least not yet. They sort of held off, it may happen later on. But because what the defense wants is no change. They don't want the judge to say anything that might sort of persuade those holdout jurors to come around. They want to keep it status quo, send them back in, which is ultimately what happened. Send them back in, Your Honor, with no additional charge, just to keep on doing their job, because they're convinced that at this point, if they haven't reached a verdict after, what's it been, 14 hours, they're not going to reach a verdict without an additional charge.
So the defense wants to keep however many jurors are the holdouts, keep them that way so that they will get a hung jury.
I think they want a hung jury on racketeering, for sure. Now, here's the rub. So they're going to be in court tomorrow deliberating. They've gone home for the night. They're going to be in court tomorrow. The dynamic with juries, and we've just seen this over and over and over again, is when they're up against a 4-day holiday, they miraculously come together.
They seem motivated, right? They seem motivated to get this done.
Yeah.
They wanted to get it done today. They would have, I think the jury was...
They were happy with 4 out of 5.
Happy with the 4 or 5, and we're probably hoping the judge...
Song.
And we're hoping the judge would just send him home.
There's a really good point on this, because the prosecution wanted the judge to mention to the jury that they may have to come back on July 3rd, which is supposed to be a holiday. The defense said, we don't want you to mention that, Judge. And they specifically said, because if you say to them they have to come back July 3rd, it might motivate them to actually reach a resolution tomorrow.
On Wednesday.
On Wednesday. And so instead, what they want the jury to think, hey, if we can, those holdout jurors, if we can just hold out for tomorrow, we'll be sent home, hung jury, we're done. If the jury knew that they might have to come back on Thursday, then they might have a problem.
Nothing drives consensus like a 4-day weekend. That's right. I'm telling you, like that jury is sitting there, and if there's one holdout, he's sweating, or he or she.
Yeah.
Elise Mahover from New York, and it's not surprising that the jury is hung up on the racketeering charge in the Diddy case, because that's sort of a really complex charge, and also it's good that they have found him, or, they made a decision on the 4 other counts. But honestly, I thought RICO was the charge that they had in the bag. And now it looks like they'll end up, convincing at least the other 4 counts. But let's see what happens with the...
Yeah, they may or may not make a decision. So listen, to summarize, the jury has come back unanimously with verdicts on sex trafficking as to Jane and Cassie, on the Mann Act as to Jane and Cassie, but they have some kind of split, and it's not 11-1. It's multiples on each side. We don't know what the multiples are, but they seem to think that they're all dug in and they can't make a decision. So they're back tomorrow. They're up against a 4-day holiday. So tomorrow might be
a 4-day holiday or just a 3-day holiday?
It might be Judgment Day for Diddy, where the verdict is read, and like you said, Diddy was not looking too happy in court.
Yeah.